Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this Farm and Sea Campus Forum on regionally sourced meats, which is part of our Product Spotlight webinar series. Today's webinar is hosted by Farm to Institution New England, or FINE, and the New England Farm and Sea Campus Network. My name is Tanya Taranovsky. I'm the Director of Programs for Farm to Institution New England, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, ideas, or other input about how our Farm to Institution networks can support your work. My email's here, and I'm happy to answer emails or at any time. Before we get started, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of the webinar today. We're going to begin with a brief introduction of FINE and the New England Farm and Sea Campus Network, and also the mechanics of our Zoom webinar. You're then going to hear from our three speakers. We'll follow the presentations with a question and answer period, and we'll wrap up by 3 p.m. So I'd like to introduce you briefly to FINE. Farm to Institution New England is the backbone organization for a 6-state network of nonprofit, public, and private entities who are all working to mobilize the power of regional institutions to transform our food system. We're working to increase the amount of good local food served in our region's schools, hospitals, colleges, and other institutions. For more information about FINE, I encourage you to explore our website, farmtoinstitution.org. The New England Farm and Sea Campus Network is a community of higher education and food system stakeholders who, in coordination with FINE, are connecting, sharing, and collaborating to develop transparent regional supply chains and educate campus communities about regional food systems. One of the programs that the Farm and Sea Campus Network has developed is this webinar series. Our webinars provide an opportunity for anyone to connect, share, and learn about farm to institution issues in New England. This particular webinar is part of our Product Spotlight series, which was developed by the Farm and Sea Campus Network Supply Chain Working Group, which is chaired by Mike Webster of the Hotchkiss School, who's also one of today's speakers, and Kyle Foley of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. The Product Spotlight webinars focus on those products that dining directors are noting as the most challenging to source locally. You can check out our previous webinars in this series, which focused on seafood and grains. Seafood was recorded back in September, and our grains webinar was recorded back in November. To view these webinars or any other previous webinars, you can visit our website and find the links to the slides and to our recordings there. I also just want to talk briefly about some of the functions we have on the Zoom webinar. We have as I mentioned, we're going to answer some questions after the presentations, and you are welcome to note questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function. You can direct questions to any or all of our speakers, and if we're not able to answer all the questions during our webinar hour, we're going to try to follow up with you afterwards. So make sure that you include your name if possible, if you want to have that follow-up. We also have a chat function, which to use this, you click on the chat button, and this is going to open the chat box, and you can use this to share comments or other information with anyone else who's attending the webinar today. So if you want to take just a moment to please introduce yourself, typing in your name and organization, and any other information that you wish to share with us into the chat box. If you're having trouble locating either of these items, move your cursor around the screen, and a bar should show up that includes the chat box and the Q&A functions. You'll see little cursor, little symbols on the bottom on the toolbar there. I also want to make sure that you realize that we're recording this webinar, and it's going to be posted on FINE's YouTube channel within the next week or so. So with the mechanics out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Our spotlight is focusing on meats, as I said. Cost, processing, storage, and customer preferences all combine to make meat one of the more difficult product categories when it comes to regional sourcing. So I'm really pleased to have these three experts joining us today to help us dig into both the challenges and the solutions. First, we have Jamie Picardy, who's an assistant professor at the University of Southern Maine, where she teaches in the Food Studies program. Jamie was previously a faculty member of geography at Mount Ida College in Newton, Massachusetts, and also at the Community College of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. She completed her doctorate degree at Tufts University in the Agriculture, Food, and Environment program through the Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy. As a program developer, she's established K-12 agricultural literacy curriculum and undergraduate geography degrees. Her interdisciplinary research in food systems addresses key issues of small and mid-sized farm viability, consumer food preference, animal welfare, food policy, and labeling. And she's going to touch on a lot of those issues today. Recently, she examined niche pork as an alternative to commodity pork in terms of production potential and land requirements, as well as consumer interest in differentiated meat products. Also joining us is Rebecca Thistlethwaite. She's the director of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. She has a master's degree in international agricultural development from the University of California, Davis, and was formerly co-owner of TLC Ranch, an organic pastured poultry and livestock enterprise in California. She's also author of 2 books on farming, Farms with a Future, Creating and Growing a Sustainable Farm Business, and also The New Livestock Farmer, The Business of Raising and Selling Ethical Meat. Rebecca lives in the Columbia River Gorge region of Oregon with her 2 children. When not running NMPAN, you'll find her cooking, trail running, or volunteering for local schools. And we also have Mike Webster, who's the general manager of dining services at the Hotchkiss School. Mike focuses on combining culinary traditions with sustainable agriculture in an effort to create an enjoyable dining experience while educating the future leaders of America. As a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, food's an important priority and a primary focus for Mike. Bringing real food to real people is an ongoing goal. Mike's worked to create a progressive dining program centered on local, sustainable, and ethical cuisine. He's a member of a 2018 New England Food Vision Prize winning team that is collaborating to develop a replica model for upscaling the procurement of whole animals for nose-to-tail utilization in campus dining, and he's going to be speaking about that project today. Mike lives in Lakeville, Connecticut with his wife Lynn, twin daughters Olive and Emily, and Remy the dog. Mike, as I mentioned, is also part of the Farm and City Campus Network Steering Committee, and we're pleased to have him joining us today. Thank you to all 3 of our speakers. We're really excited to have you sharing your expertise with us. And I would like to now hand it over to our first speaker, Jamie.
Thank you, Tanya. Tanya, I'm just having a little bit difficulty advancing the next slide.
All right, want me to do it for you?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. That's just a picture up here in Maine. It's been a little snowy, so I wanted to have a seasonal image. I'm an assistant professor again at the University of Southern Maine, soon to be University of Maine, Portland. And I work both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and I serve on Food Solutions New England network team. Thank you. Next slide, please, Tanya. Thank you. Thank you. So we Americans, we have a love affair with meat. Looking at this chart, which is the data comes from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, you can see that as Americans, on average, we have access to more meat than most other countries. It's outlined in red. Over the last 2 decades, meat consumption in the United States has been relatively consistent. What we see in this next slide, thank you, is that the data are estimated by the United States Department of Agriculture. And it's actually estimated on production and losses across the supply chain. It's an estimate because we don't actually have consumption data. What we see then is that on average, more recently, we Americans are eating more than a ½ pound of meat per person per day. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we're top consumers of meat across the globe, and we're also top producers of meat. Based on 2017 United Nations FAO data, we here in America produce approximately 33 million head of beef cattle per year, 9 billion broiler chickens, And broiler chickens are meat birds as opposed to laying hens. We produce 250 million turkeys and 121 million hogs per year. Next slide, please, Tanya. Thank you. So you can see, though, consumers are interested in what we're saying is differentiated meat. On this slide, you can see conventional commodity pork to the left and a niche pork type of production system, which is actually a picture I took down at the Stone Barns in New York. That is a picture to the right. Now, whether it is protecting animal or farm worker welfare, or oneself, concerns about our own food safety, or perhaps supporting local farms and communities, maybe even reducing environmental impacts, consumers are interested in alternative meat products. And there's definitely growing demand for these meats produced with social and environmental attributes. These production characteristics are usually associated with a geographic focus, like local or regional. Labels such as natural and humanely raised, perhaps pastured and grass finished, and finally, free of antibiotics and added hormones. Next slide, please, Tanya. Now, despite the growing demand and differentiated meat, it's actually difficult to estimate local production. Here is a screenshot I took from the USDA Census of Agriculture using their online portal called Quick Stats. And what they do is to protect farm identity. The USDA codes the data as D. If you look across the table and under the column second to the right, you'll notice that the value is labeled as D. And those actual values are hidden in order to protect the farm identities in the geographic areas that may only have a few of those farms, okay? So the data is not available for general public use. Next slide, please. It's also difficult to quantify differentiated meat because there are many variations in the production characteristics, and that separate these niche types of meat from conventional livestock. Nevertheless, certain industries within differentiated meat make their data available. And the slide that we're seeing here is the organic food industry. And they've been sharing their data for us to estimate consumption of certified organic foods. And we can see meat, poultry, and fish in the gray. And you can see other types of foods such as breads and grains in yellow, beverages in blue, dairy in purple, and then the largest growth in the organic industry is the fruits and vegetables. Overall, organic food was about 4% of total food sales in 2012. Next slide, please, Tanya. Thank you. Now, specific livestock groups also provide information on their sales for us to try to understand consumer demand and preferences. Here we see the recent growth within the grass-finished beef consumption. From years 2012 through 2016, it has doubled every year in grass-fed beef consumption and sales. Keeping in mind, though, that overall, labeled grass-fed beef represents only about 1% of total US beef market. Thank you. Next slide. So speaking of grass-fed labels, this slide shows the numerous types of eco-labels out there touching on some of the livestock types of production characteristics. Going from left to right, you can see the grass-fed beef and then ending all the way to US certified organic. Thank you. Next slide. So what farmers are recognizing is that definitely consumers are interested in local meat. And we're also seeing a steady increase at institutions such as college campuses. So farmers are very interested in selling locally and regionally because they see that potential for a price premium when consumers are recognizing certain types of production practices and value-added products. And they also are yearning for that direct connection with their consumers. So next, Rebecca Thistlethwaite will talk to us more about the processing of niche meats.
Okay, sorry. I guess I had to unmute myself first. And then request to scroll through the slides. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, I assume you can hear me. Okay, my name is Rebecca Thistlethwaite, and I'm the director of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We're a unique organization in that we are an extension community of practice that works on a national scale, uniting farmers, processors, butchers, and others up and down the niche meat supply chain, as well as extension meat scientists, academics, researchers, and even regulators. We have a really active listserv, and we help solve each other's problems together. And we are housed at Oregon State University Center for Small Farms and Community Food Systems. But as I said, we work on a national scale. Let's see if I can. Okay, I'm going to stay on the first slide. I'm going to start off just with a little personal story. So I used to be an organic pastured producer, and we scaled up to a point where we were selling about $500,000 in meat and eggs around the Bay Area of California. And I was involved in a lot of local and regional food groups and food policy councils and whatnot. And I also worked at a farm incubator in Salinas, California called Alba. And all of us were trying to figure out how to get our local niche products into larger marketplaces, not just sell at farmers markets and have little CSAs, but really scale it up and bring good food to a wider audience, and also not have good food just be reserved for those with higher incomes, but really get it into grocery stores and schools and institutions. So there was a lot of talk about scaling up and getting food into these places, but not necessarily a lot of action. So one of our local hospital chains in the Bay Area, who pledged to start serving and selling more local food, and after they had gotten all the low-hanging fruit, literally, by just focusing on local fruits and vegetables, they then started to look into animal products. So I'm not going to name names here of what hospital, but they gave us a call because we were the largest pastured organic egg producer in the state. And they said they wanted to serve local eggs. And I thought, well, that's fabulous, because we're looking for bigger markets and we would like to scale up if we have those markets. And they said, great, you know, how much liquid egg product could you get us? And we were like, we're an egg farm. We're not an egg processor. We don't have an egg breaking plant where we make liquid egg products, but we do have eggs. And if your cafeterias and your hospitals could crack eggs open to make your recipes, whether it's scrambled eggs or whatnot, then we'd love to sell you eggs. And they said, well, our cafeterias and our workers have only worked with liquid eggs, and that's what all the recipes are built on. And it would take too long for them to crack eggs. And I said to the woman calling me, I said, you will never find a local pastured organic egg operator in the state or anywhere in the country that has an egg breaking plant. So if you are not willing to change your recipe or your cooking methods to include real shell eggs, this is basically a pipe dream for you. So that was a real eye-opener for that food service director, and that ended that attempt at forming a relationship. And I just wanted to share one other story that I think illustrates a little bit of the divide between what some institutions are looking for and what the realities are for the farmers and meat brands. We had a conference center in California that's served by a contract food service company invite us to sell pork to them for a special event called Cooking for Solutions, which is held at the Monterey Bay Marine Aquarium. And we said, absolutely, that would be fabulous. You know, what cut do you need? What quantity? We will start stockpiling this meat in our freezers and get enough of the quantity of the cut that you need to serve at this event. So, and we came to a conclusion on price and everything seemed hunky-dory. And then the event came and went, and they never called us and they never actually purchased the product, right? And a couple weeks later, I was at the Marine Aquarium and I saw a big giant poster with me and my ex-husband's picture on it and the name of our farm, because they said that they had served our meat at this event, which they never did. They never actually purchased it. So that was really interesting. I had to bite my tongue, but I did contact the chef's boss and said, they didn't actually purchase meat from us. Please take that poster down, and I will not be doing business with you in the future. Anyway, that's sort of a sad story, but one that happens to small farmers often, where they get on a menu or they're served at a special event, and then the farm never hears from the food service company or the institution again, but yet their name may remain on the menu or the website or things of that nature. So I got to learn a little bit about attempting to sell to institutions while I was farming, and it made me really curious about why was there this disconnect. You know, I knew a lot of farmers who wanted to scale up, wanted to serve a larger audience, wanted to move out of farmers markets and actually become more of a wholesale operation. And then I heard that institutions really wanted this meat, but there was no meeting in the middle, pardon the pun, but there just seemed to be a disconnect. And now in my new role, working primarily with meat processors, but working up and down the supply chain, I'm getting to learn a lot more about why there is this disconnect and what are the bottlenecks, both real and perceived. And I've found a lot of them are actually perception and not actual reality, but there are certainly some challenges. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges in that supply chain, and I'm also going to talk about some models that appear to be working and what can we learn from them. All right. So some of the common challenges is that the more that a cafeteria or a food service company wants things, you know, pre-cut, pre-cooked, formed, frozen, IQF, blended, dehydrated, crumbled, etc., the more further processed that they want that meat to look like, to make it easier for their kitchen staff, maybe make it safer from a food safety standpoint, all of that. The more specialized equipment that the meat processor is going to need, the more labor time and cost of labor for that meat processor, more ingredients they'll have to procure, more documentation for all of those ingredients and all of those processes. Anytime you do any sort of further processing, it means a completely different HACCP plan has to be approved by the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. You know, a pre-cooked burger crumble is going to have a very different HACCP plan than just fresh beef or fresh ground beef. And so all of those things add significant costs and also infrastructure and equipment that processor is going to need. And so that excludes a lot of smaller processors. But it is those smaller processors that do co-packing for farmers. Large processors don't co-pack for farmers. A farmer can't take like 10 cows to a Tyson plant and say, will you process these for me? Those facilities don't do any co-packing at all. So it is only the small plants that will process for farmers, but yet if the buyers want all of these fancy further processed products, those processors can't, most of the time can't do those things. And so there has to be some compromise there and a meeting in the middle, if you will, between the realities of what the small processors can do and what you want for your cafeteria. And sometimes you can work with those small processors to grow into one of those products. So one of the models I'm going to share with you later in Montana that has a very successful local beef to school project. One processor started off with one contract with one school district, and he was able to purchase a patty maker based on that contract. And now he's scaled up to like the next size patty maker, so he can do preformed patties for that school district. So it's certainly not impossible. I think everything is figure outable. So you just may have to do it slowly and one product at a time. You know, just to give you an example, this is a IQF individual quick frozen machine at a meat processing plant I visited in North Carolina. And this is to make all kinds of different products for school districts. So this plant bought this machine for about $250,000. You can see how large it is. It takes up a huge amount of their processing floor space. I'd say about a quarter of their floor space is taken up with this giant machine. And they bought it based on the sort of verbal agreement with a district and some other buyers that they would like these products. They installed this thing, and it turns out the purchasing is not coming through to support having this machine in their plant. So a lot of it was based on and this is true, you see this all over the farm to school movement. It would be nice to have IQF patties. We would totally buy that product. Sounds like a great idea. Okay, the processor invests in it, and then the actual purchase orders don't come in. And so they're actually going to sell this machine and take it off the floor because it's not pulling its weight. Another piece of equipment, just for you to understand the price tag for something that seems relatively simple. This is a steam jacketed kettle for making bone broth and bone stock. So say you wanted to buy bone broth for your cafeteria, just this one piece of equipment is quite expensive. And also, as you can see, it does take up a decent amount of floor space. And it requires its own HACCP plan. Making bone broth or stock is very different than anything else. So it's, you know, it's time, it's record keeping, it's expensive, it's floor space, all of that. So I'm going to go into some of the best practices for mostly farm to school models, but this could work really for any food service institution or situation. But these are things gathered from other successful models around the country. And so this particular one comes from the Montana Beef to School project, which, as I said, is a really successful model. And they also have a lot of amazing resources on their website. But really, for any meat to school or meat to institution model to work, is you have to have all sides of the equation together, communicating, and also all being remunerated fairly. So they all have to be covering their costs, making a profit, and at the table talking to each other. If you exclude one of these entities from the discussion, that is typically when that model fails. So I'm going to talk about just a few things that sometimes make beef to school or meat to school projects more successful from the processor or distributor meat brand side of the equation, who might actually be purchasing animals, processing them, and then selling them to institutions or food service companies. Using cull animals can really help lower costs. So for those that don't know what a cull animal is, it's an animal that might be past its reproductive years, or in the case of like dairy animals, say one of its milk teats isn't functioning properly, or maybe it has an injury that's not causing disease or anything, but it's causing discomfort for the animal. Any reason why an animal that you wouldn't want to keep in the herd, it's not performing well, or maybe it's just an angry animal you want to get out of your herd. Those animals are typically lower cost, and that can really pass those cost savings through the all the way to the institution. A lot of institutions will buy the cull animals directly at auction. Auction yards is where you find a lot of cull animals, and then just pay for the processing. A lot of these farm to school models depend on rancher donations, which may work in one-off situations, but most ranchers have plenty of tax deductions they don't need anymore. Typically, their businesses take care of that because they are not making any money. So they don't necessarily need any more tax write-offs. So relying on ranchers to donate animals to keep your program afloat, I think, is not sustainable. I think it might be a good way to get your foot in the door and to get used to working with whole animals, but I don't advocate it as the basis of your program. Also, I like to see ranchers get paid for their work. Some models also use 4-H animals or FFA animals, which is kind of a win-win because you pay for the animal and that money goes to the kid, usually for their college, costs. Sorry about that. Processors, if they own the animal or the distributor, they could sell the high-end cuts to restaurants or other premium markets, and then sell the grind to the schools or institutions at a lower cost. So they kind of cover their margins with a high-end cuts, and then maybe can lower their price on the grind. And considering ground beef or ground meat is easy to work with and more affordable. A lot of institutions like to work with it. It's very versatile as well. It can go in a lot of different recipes. And another best practice I've seen is where the processor offers to provide cold storage for the schools or the institutions so that they don't have to have their own freezer space or large freezer space. From the buyer end user, some best practices is to work with your existing distributors and kind of push them and pressure them into actually buying local meat rather than having to create all your own new relationships. Blended products are hot these days, and that can be a way to reduce overall costs, but not necessarily. Mushrooms are not cheap. Beans are not cheap. Some of these blended things they put in the blended burgers are not necessarily cheaper, but they can be, particularly if they are like a waste product. Like if you worked with a mushroom company and was getting like the stems or something, or the seconds that aren't going into fresh markets, you could maybe create a cheaper product. There's also other perceived benefits. I'm not going to go into the science, but some folks think that blended products have a lower carbon footprint. That's definitely debatable, but it may appeal to certain audiences and help you actually sell more product in your cafeterias. So that could be a benefit. Preformed patties and other pre-cooked products could really can be a benefit to the end user and get a lot more of that product moving through their cafeterias at a faster pace and easier on your staff. But again, as I said earlier, that may not be an option for the processor. I think it's really important to test in the kitchens or the commissaries with their equipment before you go full, whole hog or contract with a buyer to buy a product. You really got to test it out. You can buy animals and pay for processing in the off season, and you can often get preferential pricing. And you'll definitely get more slaughter slots in January through April in most places, because that's the slow time for processors. And if you help keep them in business or help them keep their employees on payroll in their off season, they may be willing to give you a price break. And then just ensure that the producers and processors are meeting food safety standards. And then so we've got the producer side, the processor side, the buyer. Okay, I guess I'm getting close to time here. It's really important that you also have community buy-in, or else the whole model could fall apart. But it's good to start small. You could start with just special events, or maybe offering local meat once a month or a semester, and really focus on the benefits of serving local meat: quality, locality, nutrition, food literacy, keeping dollars flowing through your regional economy, etc. Okay, so what time are we at? Oh, a couple more minutes. So just a few models that I wanted to describe. So again, Montana Beef to School project, they have written up the results of that project, and the project is still going now. It's just basically driven by the processors and the relationships they've built with the school districts. So this is a K-12 model in Montana. But they have developed recipes and unique products like meatballs and preformed patties, and I think they're doing beef crumbles and a few other products that they've developed in collaboration with the processors. And now the processors have the right equipment, they're dialed in, they have the recipe perfected, and the model is just self-sustaining now. And here's some pictures of that Beef to School project. Another one that I'm going to mention briefly, because I think Mike is going to be talking about a whole animal model. But in the Pacific Northwest, we have the Northwest Food Buyers Alliance, which is hospitals, corporate kitchens, K-12 institutions, and probably a few others that I can't think of right now. But that was led by EcoTrust, and they are figuring out how to menu whole animals. And this is actually at a university, I think Willamette University in Salem, where they buy a few pigs a month, and then they receive the animal, they break it down, they smoke things, they sous vide things, they freeze things, they grind things. They just spend, a couple of days probably. They make stock. I see the stock kettles back there. Breaking down the animals, making a bunch of different recipes, freezing stuff, packaging some stuff, and getting it all ready so that it's ready to go in different menu items. Lastly, I wanted to point out this Beef to School decision tree that I think Tanya will send to you, so you can actually read it. This was generated in Montana. But of course, contracts and requests for quotes is definitely an issue for a lot of buyers. But I'm not going to go into the details of that because that is not my specialty. But I want to stress that while there are logistical challenges, I believe there's enough working models out there that we can draw knowledge from, and I think it is possible. You just have to start small and and form those relationships, and you can make it happen. And now we're going to hear from Mike, who will share an existing model that works.
Mike, I think you might be on mute.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Mike Webster, and I work for Torrey Hill at the Hotchkiss School, and my job is to not only feed our students, but teach them a little bit about their food and the food system. And so what I do is run the dining hall here, and a little bit about Hotchkiss. So we're a boarding school in northwestern Connecticut. In 2010, we were buying less than 5% local food. In 2013, we were the first high school to sign on to the Real Food Challenge. In 2015, we were about 23% local, and in 2018, we were 60% local. And so one of the ways that we've done this and still maintaining our financial sustainability is making major shifts in meat, grains, and winter crops. So we've done this by purchasing direct from many of our producers, as well as contracting with many farms for our products. And so at this point, all of our meat comes from New England or closer. All of our beef is grass-fed, and the pork is pastured, and so on and so forth. And so this whole animal model is something that I wanted to reproduce and recreate. And so we pitched it to the Food Vision Prize for 2018, and we're successful in doing that. So it's Smith College, Mount Holyoke College, Westfield State, and Amherst College that are all working together to purchase beef and pork from farms in New England. And the idea is that we're working with the schools to look at their velocity and their needs so that we can write some cut sheets so that we can contract with these farmers to produce this food. And so the huge impact of this is that we're redirecting about $800,000 and putting new money into our local economies. And we've forecasted that that's going to have a multiplier effect for us of about 1.9 million. And so we've done some research to try to estimate those numbers. But really the goal is that we are taking really great farms and some really great food products that are already in the area, and then bringing them to market in a way that is impactful to a large school like some of these colleges, where they've got cycle menus and they've got large dining halls, and we know that they're going to go through 50,000 pounds of meat in any given area or time frame. Allows us to better work with our farmers, for those farmers to be able to develop those products for us, right? Grow them, bring them to market. It also helps us affect quality standards. And so a lot of what we're really doing is trying to just bring new money into the marketplace. And so a whole animal purchasing model works pretty much like this. And while it's oversimplified, the idea is that we contract with our farmers. So we'll find a farm that we want to work with and that wants to work with us, and we kind of vet them. We talk about the quality of their meat. We talk about the quality of their feed, their animal husbandry practices. We'll go to the farm and oftentimes make sure that the farmer's doing all the things that they say they're doing. And then we'll come up with an agreement, and we'll have a contract around what they're going to produce and how they're going to produce it. We work with a couple of different slaughterhouses in New England. One of the biggest one is Adams in Athol, Mass. So develop those cut sheets, and then farmers deliver their meat to the slaughterhouse, and then they're paid on a hang weight price, and then the slaughterhouse does all of the cutting and processing. And then delivery, we either manage through the slaughterhouse or through a third-party vendor. But the idea is that we're redirecting existing dollars within a food budget away from big ag and, Iowa beef processors and so on and so forth, and redirecting that money into local farm economies, which here in my area in northwestern Connecticut has been incredibly impactful for the farms and the farmers in the community at large. So a little bit of a Robin Hood thought for beef and pork here. So one of the great things about buying direct from farms is that you're building relationships with them. You're really helping them to focus on what they do best, which is make great food, by giving them a standard, so to speak, of what you're looking for and how that's going to be impacted. It also allows us to have the conversation around the ethics and standards. Do we value certified organic practices, or are we content with what I call beyond organic practices, which is oftentimes abiding by organic standards, but not going to seek for that certification? It allows us to talk about soil development and perennial grasses and what that does to affect carbon sequestration and our global climate issues. And then ultimately, it's able to give us some good opportunities to support these farmers in ways that they don't generally get from a farmer's market, right? They're getting a salary of sorts, because if they produce it and grow it, we will in turn buy it and make it useful. Some of the challenges that we've run into over the years is storage space. Freezer space is at a premium in most schools. My first few years of running this program, we were actually able to save enough money through purchasing whole animals that we then built 2 additional freezers in our dry storage area, where we had some square footage to spare. The other option is to look at off-site freezer storage. And again, because of the way that you're buying food differently, it frequently comes in large volumes. And so being able to have that at an off-site location or at a freezer trailer somewhere on campus is frequently helpful in mitigating that. The scheduling and the calendar management, right? I have to think about the life cycle of the animals and how long it will take to bring something to market. And a lot of times that's working with the farmers to make sure that your needs and their needs are being aligned. Menu design. A lot of things begin to change when you go from corn-fed beef to grass-fed beef. It cooks a little faster. It's got a little lower fat content. It tastes a little bit different to your consumers, and so it's important that you're working with your culinary teams to design those things. Some of the menu items that we frequently have, like a carne asada or something like that, we're now using the flank and the skirt and the hanger and all of those really fun, tasty cuts of meat, not just ordering top rounds and then slicing them into steaks and processing them that way. So the culinary education and R&D is a big part of it, but we've just kind of learned it. We've tried it. We've succeeded with some things. We've failed at others. But the idea is that we're trying something new and we're engaging our culinary teams to think about food differently and empowering them to try new recipes and new techniques. So it's been a fun experience. And lastly, I think one of the bigger challenges is using the whole animal, right? What do I do with the organs? What do I do with the fat? What do I do with, those less desirable cuts? And so those are things that we've also embraced here. We have a really fun Halloween meal here where we serve all sorts of organs, and that is fun one day a year. But for the rest of it, we often send out our livers and back fat for liverwurst. And now liverwurst is a regular part of our menu. We have a smoker, so we frequently make a lot of our own hams and bacon, specialty sausages, kielbases, things along those lines. With the pig heads that come back, we pull the cheeks and that becomes guanciale. And then we will use those heads, we'll roast them and make a pork demi-glace. So we essentially make our own, stocks and broths out of them. But it is certainly a challenge to try to use everything that is coming back from the slaughterhouse. Have not found a good use for kidneys, but they do go over well with our dog owning community, who will frequently pick them up for raw dog food. And so, again, one of the biggest impacts of this is the local economic development. And as we start to really think about what that does for a farmer and to a processor, is it's new money into their marketplace. And so they're able to hire new staff or give raises to their existing staff, right? Fair and living wages to the farm community is a really important part of the social justice and purpose behind buying higher quality meat. They're able to get new equipment, fix new equipment, take better care of their farms, maybe deal with some outstanding deferred maintenance, so to speak. This gives them a regular salary of sorts, right? So my beef farmer knows that every single month he's going to get a check from me for beef because every single month I need beef, and so on and so forth with the other products that we buy. And so this allows them to have some more stability in their business and the cash flow that goes along with that. It also gives them a springboard to be able to project out what a growth model might look like for their business and whether or not that makes sense for them. And ultimately, what we're really trying to do is improve our community by spending more dollars within our community. Those dollars are being recycled time and time again. And so our local economies are going to become stronger as we begin to redirect those dollars back into our homes and our communities and our neighbors. And then lastly, if you're not interested in doing any of the things that I just mentioned, and you still want to try to buy local meat, I applaud you all the same. And would encourage you to look into some of these folks. Farms to Table is a really great app that I use out here. It's mainly in the Hudson Valley, but I think there's slightly in the Berkshires and Litchfield County as well. Marty's Local, Nick Martinelli is a great guy and has some amazing products. Equinox Food Brokers, this is Dan Riley, who has been doing some great work representing some farms in Vermont and in New England as a whole. Black River Produce is a longstanding and well-known distributor for us out of Vermont, and they've also got some really great farms that are in their portfolio. Dolan Bailey, similar to Black River, also has some good stuff. And if you're interested in buying directly, so if you're not interested in buying a whole cow from a farmer, again, I understand. Hudson Valley Chicken is a great company in Ferndale, New York, and they distribute throughout New England, and they have chicken and duck. Miller Turkey Farm is in Avon, Connecticut. They also distribute throughout New England, and they've got amazing turkeys. Maine Grains that we all know about up in Maine does some good stuff. Crofter's Organic Jellies, if you want to get rid of any of your high fructose corn syrup in your jellies. Wild Planet Tuna is a canned tuna fish that is wild caught and much more sustainable than what's frequently offered. Taste of Alaska is a great company that I contract with for all of our wild Alaskan salmon. And then Rhapsody Ferments is up in Vermont, and they have some great tempeh and miso. So just a couple other things outside of the meat portfolios that if you're looking to buy differently and try something new with your program, you might want to consider some of these. I'm always available. If anybody has any questions, you can call or email me anytime. My contact is at the beginning, just mwebster@hotchkiss.org. And my whole goal is to try to encourage you all to buy more sustainable meats and have more sustainable programs. So with that, I thank you very much and look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thank you also, Rebecca and Jamie. So I would like, now's a great time for anybody who has any questions to enter them into our Q&A box. So just click on that little box and enter any questions you may have, and we'll make sure that folks have a chance to answer those. But I also just want to take a moment while you're entering your questions to ask you all to please remember to fill out the survey that you're going to get at the end of this webinar. It'll pop up in a screen, and also Sarah will be sharing the link in the chat box, so you can just click on it right now. It really helps us if you take a moment to fill out that survey in order to make sure that we're delivering the best kind of content that we can for future webinars and to let us know how we're doing. So I would really appreciate that. All right, let's see what we have for some questions. Here's a question that asks, it's for Mike, so we'll follow up there real quick. Mike, do you think that the boarding school model is financially feasible for constrained budget public schools? Is there a cost model that displays that it's feasible? Councilman McAteer.
Yes, so I personally believe that it is a financially sustainable model. I do some work with the state of Connecticut and our Secretary of Agriculture with regards to modeling this for a K-12 model. I think one of the biggest challenges we have in K-12 is whether or not they have the facilities to actually cook food and not just reheat it. But in shifting to a local purchasing model for meat, we actually lowered our food costs here at Hotchkiss, and ultimately we're then able to raise our labor cost. And so our employees benefited from getting a raise, and our farmers benefited from having new customers, and ultimately it allowed us to flatline our budget over 3 fiscal years where we did not need to take a budget increase. So while I realize the economics are different between boarding schools and colleges and K-12, it is absolutely a model that is repeatable and can be successful if you've got a community that's supportive of it.
Thanks. So we have another question here. This is from Abby Miller, and Rebecca, I think I'm going to ask you to answer this one first. She says that she works with rural community schools and is asking about the distribution, whether distribution provides a challenge for using local foods there. So I'm wondering if you have a little experience with more urban versus more rural, and if you see that there are sort of unique challenges that need to be addressed in those two different types of communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. Interestingly, I think most of the K-12 models that I could find around the country are often in rural school districts. The community is smaller. It's much easier to find a rancher to donate some animals or locate some cull cows. Often rural school districts too don't have the same contracting procedures, or they're given more flexibility to do local contracting, and they often don't work with food service providers outside of their district anyway, like Cisco or what have you, because they often do their own food service. So they actually often have better flexibility to work directly with a local processor and local farmer. So yeah, there's definitely, you know, hauling and things like that, maybe longer distances, but it can work really nicely. And the community, well, rural communities, if they're raising animals in their community, they want to see that on the plates of their kids' school lunches. So they will come out in full support. I actually think urban communities might be more challenging in that regard because they don't have that connection.
Thanks, Rebecca. I actually want to take just a quick moment to also acknowledge that the New England Food Vision Prize that Mike was talking about is something that's offered by the Henry P. Kendall Foundation. So if you're interested in learning more about that, if you haven't learned about that yet, it's for colleges and universities and various partners, and that can include non-colleges and universities, to form teams to look at ways to increase the amount of local and regional food coming into those institutions. So if that's something that interests you, looking for funding for some of your efforts, you can check out the Henry P. Kendall Foundation's website for more information.
And then Tanya, I've got one more question here about the price point for the Kendall Multi-College Project.
Yeah, you want to give an answer on that for Margaret?
Absolutely. So when we issued an RFP for farms to basically, express their interest, we did ask the farms to include their asking price. And while it was not a criteria for selection, I was curious to see what the farms thought was a reasonable price. And ultimately, we set a price point that was higher for most of the farms than what they were currently asking for, but was still in line with what we knew we could manage as an institution, purchasing hundreds and thousands of dollars in meat. And the goal was to really encourage farms to take better care of their farm and invest in their successes and give them the opportunities to do it the way we were asking them for, right, with non-GMO grain and pasture and, barns. And if we wanted them to do it the way that we were hoping they were going to do it, we knew we had to pay them, a fair and living wage as well. And so much of the price point was frankly determined by me based on what I knew the threshold for dollars to be in the operating budgets of those 4 schools. And now having run this program, I know that a farmer that's, you know, asking $3 a pound hang weight for pork is probably not accounting for all of their time and energy and inputs. And I wanted the farmers to be financially successful in this endeavor as well.
Thanks, Mike. Jamie, I had one last question for you too. I'd love to know if there are any trends that you're seeing that also is a good thing for folks who are interested in buying more local and regional food, and in particular where that starts to overlap with other values. You mentioned a number of different kinds of labels and things that exist, from humane to grass finished, and just curious if there's any trends that you would call out for people to be looking at when it comes to sourcing in this region.
Yes, actually, I had a conversation with Maine Family Farms, the owner, just on Monday, Tom Maselli, and I asked him that exact question. And he said what's really hot right now is trying to look at clean labeling. So he said that very basic types of ingredient lists for the producers and processors to list on their label. He also said that for them, they're trying to develop new avenues with regard to value-added meats. So that would include gluten-free chicken tips and steak tips, different types of marinades, and that's the new avenue for them.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's probably a couple of other questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, and I think, Tim, you had some specific ones too on Farm to School that I think we might be able to try to answer offline. So I welcome you to continue the conversation, though. These are really important questions, and I think there's a lot more to dig into. And of course, sometimes there's unique circumstances with your own institution or your own efforts and work that you're doing wherever you might be working. So we welcome you to continue that conversation, and we have a lot of platforms for that. We do have working groups that continue to work on these issues. We are hoping to create a resource list that we can share with webinar attendees also on our Product Spotlight series. So we're open to getting more info on what's working for you and the questions that you have, so that we can try to provide the right kind of resources to folks who are doing this work. We also have a dining operators listserv. Fine manages this, but it's open to everybody, and it's a great place for peer-to-peer conversations amongst dining operators, sustainability managers, or anyone else really involved in the food procurement side of things at institutions. Again, feel free to email me at any time with ideas. We're really interested in hearing from you. And also just wanted to note a couple of other events that we have coming up. We're going to continue to offer more webinars, and coming up in January, we're planning one on campus farms that is going to lead into the Campus Farmer Summit, which is taking place at Stonehill College in Easton, Massachusetts on February 22nd, 2020. It's a one-day event. We hope to see some of you there as well. So check out our website for more information on these events, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Finally, I would just like to give a big thank you to our speakers who providing all sorts of great information, and then their stories and shared experiences is really helpful. Finally, please do answer that webinar survey if you get a chance. We would really appreciate that, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.